Well, the Chauvin trial officially started today. It's been a very long time since I talked about old Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. I expect, as I said, you can probably find it in my last video I did on the topic if you search the channel, that I believe Derek Chauvin will be acquitted on at least the big charges. They might get him on a couple other things. Something I'm watching is the third-degree murder charge was dismissed earlier, and the prosecution's trying to have that charge reinstated. If they are able to reinstate the third-degree murder charge, I think that there's a better chance they get him on that and then not the other two charges. Because I think that it is pretty universally accepted at this point that Derek Chauvin was overcharged. There's a big difference between thinking that what someone did was morally wrong or reprehensible or horrifying or, in a colloquial sense, murderous. There's a big difference between that and actually meeting the statutory definitions of these crimes. Because if you're a prosecutor, the burden put on you is that you must prove that a person is guilty of these charges beyond any reasonable doubt. That's a very high standard, as it should be, when you're talking about something as serious as murder, as labeling someone and convicting them of murder. Now, something that the prosecution has going for it, and that Chauvin has going against him, is that they are not moving the venue for this trial out of Minneapolis, which not a good idea, in my opinion. Not because I think that it's, it would be good if Chauvin is moved somewhere where the jurors are more favorable to him, but just because there was so much violence there already. It makes no sense to try and hold this trial. I mean, if there could be a riot outside during the trial, especially, well, I guess it's not going to be televised. But, I mean, we could get to the point to where, the verdict is announced at the end, and I guess we'll know that, we probably know that pretty quickly. And, a mob forms and charges into the courthouse. And there's going to be violence, we already know, in Minneapolis because of this trial as it's ongoing. So, to me, it seems like a bad sign for Chauvin that the court is not moving the venue for this trial. Considering that you can make a pretty good case as to why the venue should be moved, based on, just what I said earlier, just a second ago, it would seem as though they're not being too lenient on him. But the most important factor, as any of you who follow Robert Barnes, who's a sort of an internet attorney, and a real attorney too, but he's does a lot of good stuff on YouTube and Twitter. He's been discussing the jury selection process, which is what's going on right now. That is in any jury trial. That's the most important part, is trying to select jurors who are persuadable. Or who are going to be inclined from the very beginning to support your side, whether you are the prosecution or the defense. And so it's very easy for me to, look at the evidence and see that Chauvin was very clearly overcharged and that they don't have the evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Chauvin, wanted to just kill George Floyd, and actually that was his intent. That's going to be a tough thing to prove, and I personally think the evidence isn't there unless there's more that we haven't seen to come out, like some videotape or audio tape of Chauvin saying, yeah, that Floyd guy, I'm glad I got rid of him. I've wanted to kill him for years. Short of that, I think that's a very uphill climb if you're looking at this objectively. But it won't really matter if, to the extent that the jurors do not look at this objectively. If the prosecution is good at this whole jury selection process, they'll make sure to get 12 Black Lives Matter activists on the jury. And if you do that, we know absolutely which way this trial is going to go, or at least we won't know because we won't know the jurors, but we'll know afterwards, or at least the prosecution will know, the people in the courtroom will know, they'll all know based on these jurors who these jurors are, how the trial is going to go. But with all that said, I think that this trial is really a distraction more than anything. If anyone thinks that just putting Derek Chauvin away in jail is going to make any difference when it comes to whatever the underlying problem that people saw here, which is the way the relationship between the police and urbanites, or I guess because they wanted to racialize it, the relationship between the police and black people. And actually, at the time, back last year, I thought that these riots stemmed a lot from the economic impact of the lockdown, and that this was a pressure release valve, essentially. This was just a spark that lit the kindling of the angst that much of America was feeling at that point. No matter what you think the issue is that was behind the riots, getting Derek Chauvin's scalp, it's not going to fix anything. If your problem is with the police in general, the prosecution of an individual police officer is meaningless, because that's just using him. That's just letting the system use him as a scapegoat, which is exactly what the Minneapolis Police Department intends to do. That's why they scrubbed the records that they used. That this whole knee on the neck thing. That was actually an established protocol. That was a part of his training. The government has tried to conceal that to make Chauvin look like some kind of a lone wolf, somebody who's just out there looking for trouble, who wanted to go kill a black guy. This is a convenient narrative. Makes it look like he's just one bad apple. And if you've got one bad apple, well, if you filter him out and you throw him in the trash, well, then everything's good and dandy again. But if the problem is that the Minneapolis Police Department trains their officers to act this way, well, then the people are not going to have a problem with Derek Chauvin so much as they will the Minneapolis government itself. And of course, as I've felt for many, many years, I think probably I started feeling this most strongly after the death of Eric Garner. I believe Mike Brown was the name I was thinking of before. I did not mean him, the Ferguson guy, the gentle giant, as Rush used to call him. No, Eric Garner, who was I believe he was an overweight man who was selling Lucy cigarettes on the streets of New York, and Lucy is a slang term for an individual cigarette outside of a carton or outside of a pack. And what he was doing is he was buying cigarettes outside of New York City, bringing them into New York City, and selling them, without paying essentially the tariffs that New York imposed on cigarettes. For this crime, Eric Garner was, put in a headlock and wrestled to the ground, and ultimately had a heart attack during the struggle, and died. Now, a lot of people at the time said, oh my gosh, these cops, and they still say that, these cops murdered Eric Garner. They're terrible people. These cops need to be prosecuted. As if the cops were doing anything against, as if the cops, again, were rogues who were lone wolves out trying to hunt black people. In reality, these NYPD officers were just following orders, as the Nuremberg defense goes. They were following the orders of Michael Bloomberg, the mayor, who imposed this cigarette tariff. That's the nature of laws. When the government passes laws, it's up to the police to enforce them. So, if in the course of enforcing those laws, you believe that, or if you believe the enforcement of those laws is unethical, that's to say that the law itself is unethical or immoral, which I would agree. Yet nobody at that time said to themselves, gee, maybe we should repeal this law about Lucy cigarettes so that we don't have, fat guys on the street with a pack of cigarettes getting indirectly killed. Well, getting killed. Yeah, no, he was killed. It wasn't indirect. It was a direct result of the police's action trying to enforce this law. Getting killed over stupid cigarette tax. The problem here is with the system writ large. If Eric Garner was committing, a crime that, most people would consider serious. If Eric Garner was trying to, steal an old lady's purse, and a cop put him in a headlock and he had a heart attack, people would say, well, boo-hoo, you shouldn't have been stealing that lady's purse. But when he's just walking around with a pack of cigarettes, that was untaxed, nobody's going to look at Eric Garner and say, well, you should have paid your cigarette tax, when he's, or they're not going to say that to his kids when they're crying at their dad's funeral. No, nobody would do that, because you know that it's wrong. Yet nobody ever wants to address that. And it's infuriating, because it's like, how do I talk to these BLM people? They just want to tell me that I'm an evil white racist. And my response to them is always just go screw off. Go F yourself. I don't want to say that because I don't want YouTube to delete my video if it's too spicy. And that's why I do sympathize with individual people who have bad run-ins with the police and end up at the very least mistreated and at the very worst dead. But I do not sympathize with the Black Lives Matter movement, or generally with any of these, with the prominent anti-cop activists. Now, some of the more fringe people I do like. But generally speaking, these people who are promoted by the media, who are speaking out against the cops and what they're doing, have an alternative agenda that they're pushing. And essentially, the deaths of these men, and women in some cases, they're just used as fodder to push certain political causes, or to, further the grift of certain influencers, like, what's his name, Sean King, and others. And it's such a shame. If I had the talent of some of these folks who are able to whip people up into a frenzy, I would not waste it on whipping them up into a frenzy just, against, small business owners or white people. I mean, I would actually, if I actually had the power to influence the masses, I would want to use that power to try and actually accomplish what these, to try and help these people alleviate their stress, to help them achieve their goals. A lot of the useful idiots who go out and participate in these riots, they think that they're rising up against the system, that they're engaging in an act of revolution, and that by smashing the window of that toy store, that they're gonna really show Whitey who's boss, and then no more black guys are gonna get tackled by a cop and then have a heart attack. Now, again, I said a year ago that I didn't think George Floyd should have died. And I still stand by that statement, because, what he did wrong was nothing that I find particularly immoral. It was not really a reason that he should have been arrested. The initial call was over counterfeiting, and, I mean, anyone who follows my channel, do I really need to speak out against counterfeiting? Do I really need to explain why locking up an ordinary American for counterfeiting U.S. dollars is so insulting to anyone's intelligence? The Federal Reserve creates trillions and trillions of dollars out of thin air all the time, and nobody cares. Nobody cares when the Fed does it. But if an ordinary person decides to print themselves a $20 bill, then the cops are going to come and arrest you and throw you in prison. Sorry, I just don't care. The government decides to have this phony paper money system that's easily counterfeited. That's your problem. If you used real gold coins, you wouldn't have to worry about that. And if anything, if you're saying, well, the dollar is a note, it's a debt instrument, it's a security by printing up dollars that are not official, that's fraud. Well, then charge the person with fraud, but you don't go in. That's a white collar crime. People don't have physical interactions with the police over fraud. And let's be honest, the only reason why George Floyd freaked out the way he did was, well, one, he was high. I think that's pretty much confirmed now that George Floyd, yes, he was high, so he wigged out. But two, he was worried because he knew he had drugs on his person. He wasn't worried about the counterfeiting, about getting arrested for that. He wasn't trying to, do all this crazy stuff and say, oh, I'm claustrophobic, you can't put me in the police car, as if that's going to stop anything. What he was doing is he was trying to stall, it would seem, so that he could get rid of the drugs that he had on him, so that he could try and, I guess, swallow them or something. That's what some people are saying based on some of the footage. And actually, when the full body cam footage came out a while ago, I watched it all and I reviewed it on this channel. So, again, if you want more information, detailed information on the body camera footage itself, I don't play it on here because I don't play anything because of copyright stuff and things like that. I never play any videos. But again, you can go back and hear my thoughts on that. The fentanyl, but anyway, getting back to the crime at hand here. Oh, he was in possession of a chemical that the government says, oh, well, you're not allowed to have that unless one of these doctors who went to one of these government approved or government run schools whose admission is completely controlled by the government. Unless you have sort of the state's indirect seal of approval via doctor, you can't possess these chemicals. And to that, I say to people, go to hell. People can possess whatever they want. And if you lock somebody up in prison, if you try and haul somebody away for drug possession, you're the villain in that story. You're not a hero, okay? This Floyd guy clearly had some issues. He clearly had some problems. He didn't seem to be a great guy from what I've learned about him. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to throw him in a cage where he will likely be sexually assaulted or assaulted in some other way, forced to join a gang to survive, just because he was in possession of drugs. And so when people who have drugs, because they have a drug problem, interact with a cop, they're going to act pretty erratically. They're going to be very worried. They're going to want to get out of that situation. They're going to run. They might even attack the cop to try and fight him off so that they can get away, to avoid being locked in a rape cage. There, I said it. And so, yes, George Floyd is a victim in this case. That doesn't mean that the individual cops involved are murderers by any sense. I don't think that they are. Well, I shouldn't say that. If in a you can make the moral case that they are murderers. From a statutory sense, I don't think they are at all. But Floyd is more so a victim of the war on drugs than he is a victim of these individuals. Yes, individuals make up the system, but the system itself, the system of the war on drugs, of the American police state, is really the main issue here. You can throw throw cops in prison all you want. That does not change the laws that they are told to enforce. I am not one of these people who comes out and just bashes, the police officers all day. Yes, they are the tip of the spear, so I'm not particularly fond of them. But, in reality, they have an impossible job. Their job is impossible because, on the one hand, there are some noble, important things that a police officer is tasked with doing, like protecting people. That is something that, even though the courts have ruled many, many times that the police have no obligation to protect you, there are people who have been helped in bad situations, by police officers. And that kind of stuff is noble. But then they're also told to do really evil, bad stuff, like lock people up in rape cages, also known as prisons, for possessing chemicals that the government deems unsavory, like marijuana or cocaine or fentanyl or morphine. And so it's, being a police officer is kind of an impossible job because, you can't do the good things of being, that come along with being a police officer without doing the really, really bad things. So all these guys have to get their hands dirty. And so unfortunately in our society, the instinct has become either to completely praise, a police officer, completely condemn them, or to, again, resort to this, a few bad apples fallacy. This idea that there are good cops and bad cops. Yes, some cops are worse than others, but even the best cop, if to the extent that he is carrying out all of his duties, is still a bad guy. In fact, a bad cop might make a good person if that bad cop is skimping out on some of his duties and sticking to some of the others. Like, for example, if he is hunting down, robbers and burglars and murderers, but he is turning a blind eye to drug users or to, prohibited possessors of firearms and things like that, you could call him a bad cop because he's not enforcing the law, but he's a good person because he's taking down bad people and not interfering in the lives of peaceful people, not locking them up in prison, which is, a very, very bad thing. You shouldn't. People take prison way too lightly. I should say, people who haven't been to prison take it very lightly, and I think that it's one of the worst things about modern America is how people think of prison. And it's not even that they don't realize that they don't know how bad it is. They do, and they laugh about it. Like people online, when they hear that somebody they don't like is going to prison, they're like, oh, I hope you drop the soap, ha ha ha, like it's funny. It's not funny. And so you should only wish prison on someone who has done something really, really vile. Because they'll be locked up in there with other vile people who will do horrible things to them. And so what good do these police officers do by locking up someone who is not really a bad person, but happens to have some drugs on them? Maybe they have a drug problem that they need some help with. But they're in possession of drugs, which is a felony, and so they get locked in prison. With all these bad people and subjected to horrible things. Am I supposed to thank that cop who did that to that person? Am I supposed to thank them for their service? Am I supposed to thank them for protecting and serving our community? No, of course I shouldn't. But do I want that individual cop for some reason to be the one who faces consequences and gets thrown in prison himself? Just for, I guess, revenge? For the people he's thrown in prison who shouldn't have been there? No, of course, that's stupid. Throwing one cop who, by doing his job as he's instructed by the system, by being a cog in the wheel, by locking him up in prison, you accomplish nothing because there's 100 other guys waiting behind him to take his place as a cog in the wheel. There are always going to be men who are willing, and women, willing to do bad things for money or for whatever reasons, because they're propagandized and told that they're heroes for doing what they're doing when they're doing bad things to people. And again, I'm not one of these, typically, when you talk about the individualists versus the collectivists, I definitely always am in the individualist camp, and yet here I am saying, no, you can't punish an individual for crimes of the collective. I'm not saying that it would be morally wrong to hold individual cops accountable for their actions. What I'm saying is that in the aggregate, it does not make anything better. I'm making a utilitarian argument, not a moral argument. They're different. They're different metrics. And I'm trying to point out that from a utilitarian perspective, if you focus on the individual cop, if you focus on the so-called bad apples, it's going to distract you from the bigger issue. And that's exactly what it does. That's what the system uses. The system will scapegoat some of its own because they don't give a damn about the cops either. The police department does not care about police officers. The police department cares about itself as an institution preserving its own power and prestige. It does not care about the reputations or the integrity or the freedom of its servants, the police officers. So I think that I've said about enough on this topic. I could go on like this for an entire hour, and who knows? Maybe I'll explore more of this in the future. But as this topic begins to creep back up, I think it's really important that I get out in front and lay down a baseline of expectations, so that, I mean, even for myself, so that I don't get distracted by this later on and get bogged down into the details. Because I think that there's a lot of bad people on all sides of this issue, because this is not a two-sides thing. There's a lot of bad people all over who are trying to distract people from the bigger picture here that actually matters. So with that said, I will leave things off here for today.